Hello and welcome to the launch event for Stackify's brand new product, Prefix. My name is Matt Watson and I'm the founder and CEO of Stackify. I'm going to be your tour guide today. I'm going to give you a little demo and try and answer some questions about how it works, what it does, and some of the amazing things that you can do with it. Very excited to show it to you and very excited to get this awesome free tool into your hands. So all of our existing products are designed to do that for your pre-production and production servers. We've built an amazing set of products for monitoring performance, errors, logs, and much more. We definitely have one of the very best APM products on the market, and it's low cost and it's designed for developers to use. It's very developer centric. So basically what we've done is we've taken everything we know about finding application problems, application performance, errors, logs, all this stuff, and we've repackaged it to be a nice little tool that developers can use while they're writing code and testing their own code. So we have this great monitoring tool for production, but really the problem is how do we help developers find and fix problems before they get to production? And that is where Prefix comes in, and that is why we call it Prefix. I've been a developer for about 15 years and had about every problem imaginable when it comes to building apps and, you know, fixing bugs and new features and problems and all these things. And it's just been our constant pursuit to make developers' lives easier. When we started Stackify, there just wasn't a lot of good tools for developers. So many of the tools were designed for system administrators. They weren't really designed for today's highly scalable cloud-based apps, all that kind of stuff. And Stackify has really created an excellent product in that space. And Prefix really brings that even home a little more. So the way we look at things at Stackify is we have our production monitoring, as you'd see here on the right side of the screen, which you could call, Stackify Pro, or it's for production use. In the middle, we've got prep, as it says here on the screen, which would be for QA or pre-production. And on the left, we have Prefix. And so really our goal is to help developers through this whole cycle. So use Prefix to find problems, tune your apps, help with developer productivity, all of those kinds of things. And then as you deploy your app to pre-production and production, Stackify's other products can help along the way with monitoring and improving those applications as well. So what does Prefix do exactly? Well, we like to think of Prefix as being your new sidekick. It's really designed to run on your second monitor. So if you got two monitors on your desk, you got one, you're writing code, you're testing your app, you're navigating through your app. Prefix is your awesome sidekick to live on your second screen. It's awesome for viewing logs, SQL queries, errors, performance of all kinds of different things. If nothing else, it's like the world's best log viewer you've ever seen. It's really fantastic. And you'll really see that when we get into the demo here. The best way to think of Prefix is it's kind of like Google Chrome's dev tools that you use for troubleshooting problems within the browser and seeing all the requests go through and how long they take, except Prefix shows you the server-side view of that. And it really is pretty incredible. So next thing we're going to do here is we're going to jump right into a demo. So what I have here is I have Prefix on the right side of the screen, and for now I have a condensed down view here just to kind of show you how it works. So on the left side I have a simple web application on my local machine, and as I load the pages on the left, you'll see on the right some activity. Okay, so if I go over here and I go to the API page, you'll see that load over there. Click on this. The thing on the left here is just like a default web API project, I believe is what it is. You've probably seen before. So you can see on the right, you can see the Prefix activity loading. So now, let me maximize Prefix here. If I come over here, these pages don't really do anything, so it doesn't show a whole lot as far as what methods are called and how long they take. I can see that it's returning a view, the name of the view. I can see it was a status code 200. I can expand this. I can actually see the headers. I can see the response. On the request side, I can see the headers that came in, and if there was any query string or post data that was sent in, you can potentially see that here as well. You'll notice that we show all the modules. If you're using custom modules and stuff that potentially take a lot of time or doing special routing and that kind of stuff, you could track the performance of them here as well. So I'm showing you this really basic example so you can kind of see the lay of the land. On the left, you've got a real-time view of web requests as they happen, and on the right, you can see the details about any one of these web requests. And as I showed you, it all loads in real time as you're navigating through your page. So in a real-world example here, let's see, I've got this really basic home page. But if I jump over to Visual Studio and just add a few extra lines of code. So I'm just going to add a couple tracing statements and have it go download the Stackify.com homepage. So I'm going to rebuild this here real fast. All right, got that rebuilt. So now if I go back over here and I go to the home page, let me also open up Prefix here. Just 1 second. All right, so that loaded, and I can see it loaded here. You'll notice right away that it says compilation here because that's what took the longest. The first time the page loads, there's a lot of compilation that happens, and we actually track a lot of the key methods that are attributed to compilation. So let me hit it again so it'll be faster the next time around over here. All right, so now let me expand this. And now I can see here an additional icon that shows a web service call was done. And when I look at the profile trace, I can see that our web client took about 275 milliseconds to complete the request to go download this. And actually, Prefix shows you that it took about 90 milliseconds to get the initial response, and then about another 185 milliseconds to actually download the page. So we give you some very detailed information. We're all about performance and helping you understand the performance of your code. You'll also see now these trace statements, the 2 trace statements I added. So Prefix automatically works with trace.writeLine, debug.writeLine. It also works with nlog, log4net, and some other logging frameworks. And we also automatically collect exceptions. So now that we've went through some basic stuff here, I'm going to jump over to our demo site. And our demo site is at demo.prefix.io. If you can go to this at any time. It's a live demo that's always here. It's always running. You can also go to prefix.io, and we have a whole little website there about the product, and there's a link on prefix.io to the demo, as well as to download the product. So, as I mentioned earlier, you got that left real-time view, and as you see here, this is constantly updating for our sample app, and the top is a timeline view from the last 5 minutes. So it shows you everything that's went on in the last 5 minutes. And what's really awesome about Prefix is the way it works is it's designed to be very lightweight and run in the background. And anytime that you need it, you can pull this up and you can see what's just happened. So you don't necessarily have to try as hard to recreate certain issues if you're running into an issue when you're writing new code or testing something. Prefix is always here. You just pop it open, and there's this great trail of all the information that tells you what has just occurred. So I'm going to drill in here to this request called get top people. I'm going to look at that for a second. So I mentioned earlier the logs. So again, you can see here's all the logging that's going on. These logs here are actually coming from log4net. You can actually see JSON here too. So if you're using nlog or log4net and you're logging objects, custom properties, we can actually grab that stuff and it'll show up in here in JSON, which is pretty cool. Let's see, you'll also notice there's a Redis call here, and we automatically track the keys. You can see that. So not only does Prefix help you understand performance, but also helps you a lot with understanding the behavior of what your application is doing. So I know it accessed this Redis key, I know it connected to this database server and this database. I can see it ran this SQL query, and that query took 23 milliseconds. If I expand that, I can see the query. So if I was having some kind of problems with the query or wanted to do some tuning, I could simply copy that query, um, go over to some type of SQL management tool, and do some query tuning, update my code, and run this again. You'll notice here, download query result, 20 milliseconds. Back to the same example I mentioned earlier with the web request. Prefix is really smart. So we actually know that it took 23 milliseconds total to run this query, but 20 of those was actually downloading the query. So depending on how you look at performance, some things may tell you it only took 3 milliseconds to run that query, where actually it took 23 milliseconds by the time that your code actually iterated through all the records. That's really important, and sometimes other performance type stats could be misleading. Something to think about. So prefix, we've worked very hard in prefix to uncover these types of things that take hidden amounts of time. Another one of those that's a perfect example is down here on the bottom. You'll see, this is an MVC controller, and the result of it is JSON. Well, we actually show you it took 21 milliseconds to serialize that JSON. Depending on uh, the type of action you have and what's being done, it can take a long time to serialize a view or serialize JSON, all those types of things. And Prefix does a good job of highlighting that. If you're really trying to tune for performance, this kind of stuff will really show in here. Okay, so let's jump over now to another example I have in our sample app, this one called Stackify.devices. You'll notice it's got several icons here: database, web service call, cache call, and an error. So right away you'll notice the error here. One thing that's really important to know is because Prefix is built on the .NET Profiler, we can automatically catch all exceptions that are thrown. Exceptions can really bog down the performance of your application because when an exception happens, it has to stall the thread so it can walk back the stack trace. So especially in a busy application, exceptions can be a big drain on your performance, and Prefix automatically can show you all of your exceptions, even if you're not logging them anywhere. If you have no logging at all, it'll automatically show them. There are some exceptions that happen under the cover that are just kind of noise, and we work to hide those exceptions as well, so they don't become kind of a nuisance within Prefix. So you'll notice about this request, it's got a couple database queries. It also has a web service call. I showed an example of one of those earlier as well. And you'll see down here, this one has a JSON result, but this one didn't really take any time, 0 milliseconds. All right, let's look over at one last example for our demo here. We're looking at people.productlist now, and this is a great example of kind of a common problem. This took 361 milliseconds, which isn't all that terribly slow. A lot of times most people would never notice this. It may not ever show up on any kind of report as being poor performing. It didn't take seconds to load. It took less than half a second to load. But one thing you'll notice right away is it's had 38 database calls. Well, it does one query here. My debugging says it had 295 products. Well, when this renders this to an MVC view, and I can tell it's a view, it says right here, gives me the name of the view, it's called product list, there's a whole bunch of additional database queries that are happening. Well, I'm going to guess that you've seen this before as well. What happened is we're using Entity Framework and some lazy loading is happening. So somebody added an extra property in the view, and different ORM providers may do some lazy loading, like in Hibernate, Entity Framework, those types of libraries. So all of a sudden it ran 37 more database queries. Each one of them only took 0 to 1 millisecond. They're very fast, but they all add up. So Prefix, at the top here, we can see our main query took about 161 milliseconds. And then we show down here all these other queries that 37 of them took 54 milliseconds. And that says send response, render MVC view, 135 milliseconds. So if I come back down here, I can see the total amount of time to render that view was 189 milliseconds. That's a lot of time for rendering a view and 135 of that wasn't even database related. It was just actually looping through the data and rendering it. And this is a good example of something that may not perform so terribly that it's a huge deal, but I guarantee a little bit of work can be done to this code to make this MVC view render a lot faster, because it's just a simple grid output, and I guarantee the way that it's iterating through and binding that is not very efficient. So I walked you through a few different examples here. For those of you who are using Stackify's APM product, one of the things you may have noticed along the way here is down at the bottom, we show performance comparison data to other environments. So if you happen to be using Stackify in QA or production, performance stats about this exact request for this app would show up down here at the bottom. Just to give you an idea of how often it's used, how long it takes to load, number of errors, and then anytime with one click you can jump right into Stackify APM and view all the gory details that we collect through our APM product. So this gives a view of all the requests that are happening over a very long time frame, over multiple servers, a lot more summary data, very similar to what Prefix does. It's the same underlying technology actually. And then there are profile traces in here, so you can actually see the same exact profile traces that you see in Prefix, but you can see them for your production or QA applications. That's all I'll cover for this, but just to give you an idea of how the products all work together. So a developer can be working locally and immediately jump right in to view performance for QA and prod and see how it all relates. All right, so now we'll jump back to our presentation here. So how does Prefix work? I'm sure you've been wondering that as we went through it. As I touched on briefly, Prefix is based on the .NET Profiler. So a lot of you have probably used a profiler in the past, be it Visual Studio's built-in profiler or other products like Redgate's Ants tool. There's lots of profilers that exist, and they're great tools, but they're very heavy. They're very slow, right? I mean, usually when you're using one, it's a bad day. It's not something you normally do. It's you got a memory leak, or you're trying to really tune a CPU problem, and it's pretty labor intensive to use one of those tools. Now they're insanely powerful, and when you need them, they're a lifesaver. But Prefix works on the same technology, but it's very lightweight. And the difference is we only track key methods within the .NET framework that we know are really important when it comes to understanding performance and the behavior of your app. We don't track every single method in every line of code, which potentially profiling does, and that's why profiling is so slow. So as I mentioned, the technology behind Prefix is the exact same technology that is behind Stackify's APM product for monitoring production servers. And we have clients all over the world that use that technology today, and it has been very tested. It's definitely very stable and has very little overhead to your application. So as your developers are writing code and testing their app on their local machine, Prefix can just run in the background and not interfere with what they're doing and not slow them down. And what's awesome is it's always there when they need it. That, instead of trying to reproduce some kind of problem and diving into a profiler and messing with all of that, potentially you can open up Prefix and see exactly what you need to see. Now, Prefix is not a replacement for a real deep level profiling session. Still going to have to do that from time to time, but Prefix is insanely useful on a day-to-day basis, and that's the big difference. So one of the other things to really understand about Prefix and how it's different potentially from some other things that exist out there is Prefix takes literally a few seconds to install. It's a simple Windows installer. It runs as a Windows service in the background, and it doesn't require any type of configuration or code changes to work. Now there are some other tools that are out there potentially, and a lot of them require a whole lot of configuration changes, a whole lot of NuGet packages. Then that stuff all gets deployed potentially to QA and prod, and that is a lot of extra baggage and junk that gets deployed. That a lot of times managers or somebody will come by and say, "Get this crap out of my code. I don't want this getting deployed to production." Well, the good thing about Prefix is It never has to be. It doesn't really impact your application. It just works, and that's what's awesome about it. So I know you got to be thinking, what exactly does Prefix support? So Prefix works for any ASP.NET request that are HTTP based. So it works for MVC, Web API, WCF, Web Forms, Nancy, Service Stack, Sitecore, some new thing called Web Pages, bunch of different things. And we'll continue to add additional frameworks like that as they come along. Um, Pretty soon we plan to have support for Java. We will have support for ASP.NET Core when that launches. We assume in early April, and we continue to add support for additional third-party libraries. Today we have support for over 30 different Microsoft and third-party libraries, which includes SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, Postgres, MongoDB, Elasticsearch, RavenDB, all kinds of different popular frameworks that developers use, as well as, let's see, Redis, Memcache, different queuing providers, all the Azure main Azure libraries for things like table storage and blobs and queues, AWS libraries. We have a whole list of them in our docs at docs.stackify.com, and there's a link to that from Prefix, by the way. And we'll continue to add to those. Our pursuit is really around anything that can slow down your app and cause per, performance overhead. We plan to continue to add additional libraries, and we'd love to have your feedback if you're using something that we don't currently support. Um, because Prefix is a profiler, one of the cool things you can do is you can actually tell Prefix to instrument and profile your own code as well. In our docs, we have some information about how to actually do that, but basically there's a little JSON file that gets put in the Prefix install folder, and you tell it what classes and methods that you want Prefix to profile, and then you restart your application, and Prefix will then automatically profile your custom methods, and then those will show within the profile traces, which is really cool. Now, I will note that can be a little dangerous. If you went in and did system.data, every method underneath that, it could bring your app to a screeching halt pretty fast. So you want to be careful with it, and you only want to, if you're going to do custom config, just pick specific methods that you really want to track, or specific things don't get called a million times. One of the other things that's really awesome about Prefix is we actually have really good support for async. Most all APM products that exist in the market today do not support async, and Stackify absolutely does. We've spent a lot of time to perfect the best we can support for async. So if you're using MVC or Web API or Web API in async fashion, that will work fine. Things like database calls, HTTP, web service type calls. A lot of common libraries and frameworks now are moving all their methods to async, and most all of that stuff will just work out of the box, which is awesome. It doesn't require any code or config changes. It just works, and you'll notice that's a reoccurring theme for us. We want Prefix to just work for you. So that will conclude my little demo for today. Um, you know, we'd love to hear your feedback on Prefix, and I think we're most excited to hear about all the crazy problems you find in your code. And I'm sure you didn't cause any of the problems. Somebody else did, I'm sure. Uh, we've heard some pretty crazy things. We hear people who find database queries that are 87,000 characters long, and pages that do thousands of cache lookups, and that entity framework lazy loading kind of problems. The list goes on and on and on, and it always excites us when we can help developers be more productive and write better applications. So please enjoy Prefix, and let us know what you think. Thank you.